You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 292 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. And I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's rainy, Jeremy. It's rainy.
It's been miserably rainy today. The game got started a little late today. We will talk about the Cubs since our last episode, our post-trade deadline venting. After that, baseball was played. We were wondering if it was going to be weird. We'll get into. We'll touch briefly on the St. Louis series. We'll talk about the Miami series, and then we'll talk about what this looks like going ahead for the Cubs to help us unpack all of the happenings of the week. Longtime personal friend of this show. You know him from all of his fantastic writing and his contributions here, as well as CHGO. Jared Wyllys, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
I am glad to be with you guys.
And we're always glad to have you. We haven't talked to you since the trade deadline. Holy cow. We're still, it wasn't the first game in St. Louis. It was the two games on the Thursday that I'm watching it. I'm like, this is, it's as weird as I thought it was going to be. and Jared, I know you were in the building this weekend. Which games did you attend?
I was there Friday and Saturday.
Okay.
And so, notably that first game back at Wrigley when Wilson was still on the Cubs and made his return. And after we had all said these, had this sort of farewell tour for him and said our goodbyes. And then there he was. So, it was a weird couple of days for sure.
So let me get this straight, Jared. Every game that you were too lazy to go to, the Cubs lost this week.
Basically that's how
they
it
were
breaks
2-4. They're 2-4, and you can only bring yourself to go to two games.
I need to get out there more.
Yeah, Wilson single-handedly winning that game on Friday.
That's right.
It was, as a fan of Wilson Contreras, the player and the person, I was extremely excited to watch him win. That was an electric moment. This crowd having something to cheer for, Wilson celebrating, and just classic Wilson Contreras. That was great. Except it
Jed
doesn't
Hoyer
help.
Thinking,
doesn't help the long-term plans.
Jed Hoyer thinking, there goes the lottery, right?
The whole thing to me kind of felt like we've kicked this whole Wilson Contreras thing. We kicked the can down the road just a couple of months. Because it was a cool moment on Friday. And the first time he went up to bat and everybody was cheering really loudly and he did get sort of a standing ovation, but it was not the same as that last game before the deadline when everybody thought we're saying goodbye.
Yeah.
And so understandably it wasn't quite as, I don't want to paint it as if people weren't excited, but it just wasn't at the same level on Friday. But then, of course, the place got real loud when he hit that home run in the 8th inning to give him, to put him ahead. But, definitely and we talked to him after the game on Friday and just, it was kind of like we're just still having the same conversation in some ways because some of the questions were right back to, well, Wilson, what do you think's going to happen? And what, have you talked to Jed and what's, and all of those kinds of things. So, he does seem happy that he wasn't traded. He said several times, I'm here. The important thing is I'm here and I'm glad to be here. I believe that he very much wants to stay in Chicago, but it's really kind of anybody's guess whether that's going to actually happen or not.
So let me ask you this then. Beginning the season, before the season, the owner of the team, said the Cubs had what it took resource-wise to compete this year. And so there's a thought, hey, are the Cubs competing this year? And then we heard later on, well, actually, they're more or less, whether you call it a rebuild or you call it whatever you want, they're tanking this year. And it seems to me that they're having a hard time doing either particularly well. It seems that they could have tanked. They're certainly well on their way to tanking record-wise. But by not being able to trade a couple of their better players, they run the risk of falling outside of the draft lottery. And if you're trying to tank, the last thing you want to do is A, get worse draft picks, and B, hold on to people who you could have traded for prospects, because that's the whole idea behind tanking. And if they were trying to compete, well, then they've got a whole slew of other problems if they thought this was going to be a competitive team. But what's the deal?
Well, I think in Wilson's case, what it boiled down to was, I don't think that they were getting the offers that they were hoping to get. I don't think there was as much enthusiasm from other teams about Contreras as Jed and Carter Hawkins hoped that there would be. And a lot of that
and every single person on Cubs Twitter who thought for sure the Cubs would get multiple top prospects for him. I mean,
right.
It's one thing today to say, oh, well, getting a qualifying offer is fine, but no one was talking like that, a week ago.
No, and I count myself among the people who definitely expected him to be traded. I think I had slightly more reasonable expectations about what the return would be compared to some of the ones that I saw out there. But I think a lot of it came down to, as a catcher, some of his defensive skills, his framing in particular, and his game calling is maybe regressed a little bit. He's not quite as good as he used to be. And so as a backstop, some of those skills aren't at the level where other teams would want. And then, and I think we see some evidence of that. Like, look how frequently he's used as the designated hitter. I know, Rossi talks a lot about like saving his legs and keeping him in the lineup and stuff like that. But like, if he was a really good catcher, you put him in at catcher.
I mean, they did try catching him every single game for a couple of years in a row, and that had setbacks.
Yes.
But don't you think that the bat alone would be good enough? I mean, we saw other players who are worse hitters than Contreras get traded for decent prospects.
And that was the part that did surprise me a little bit, because I expected, even as a primarily somebody who you're getting him for his bat, I thought that there would be more interest. I do wonder if the struggles that he had in July either scared some people away or at least changed what their offers became. I think we all can point to, it seems pretty clear why he was struggling in July, because he was distracted. He's come out and said it. He's been very plain and very open about that. He said it was hard for him to focus. And understandably so. It's amazing to me that players can just keep playing through dealing with that kind of thing. So I think
then they should have traded him the day after the All-Star game. I mean,
really, like don't. And I think some of that is on Jed, because maybe you waited too long.
My theory is that they were waiting on the Padres, and they thought they had a deal they could get. And when the Padres were able to land Soto instead, the Cubs had basically an hour to go to Plan B,
right.
And a lot of the other offers kind of dried up all of a sudden, and they ran out of time. I hope that's the answer, as opposed to they just had much better offers earlier and dilly-dallied and held out for more, and they got nothing. That would be more infuriating to me.
Definitely. And I do think, because all the buzz was around San Diego and in a package deal too. I think the expectation for a while was that both Contreras and Happ might go there. But yeah, I think once that Juan Soto stuff really started to heat up, and if you're the Padres, who do you prioritize? Do you prioritize trying to get Ian Happ and Wilson Contreras, or do you go after Soto? Of course you go after Soto. So I do suspect as well that there was probably we put maybe not all of our eggs in this Padres basket, but most of them. And then when that didn't work out, then they were kind of left scrambling a little bit to try to get something with another team, and it just didn't work out.
There will be a book one day. Someone in the room who will tell us the story about what actually happened. It'll be many, many years down the road, but I look forward to to one of those tell-all books coming out to give us the play-by-play of that day.
Hey, Jared, I have a quick question for you. You're a newsman. You're a sports guy. You're in the know here. What's the deal with this Jed Hoyer interview this week where he's talked about the team, and it almost gave the impression that we're looking at like 2024 before we try to compete, and that next year's another kind of blow-off year. Is that accurate, or is that
are we coming at it? Are we reading it with a cynical eye, or are we reading
kind
it
of what
accurately?
he's saying, sort of. I mean,
It's tough. I have a very hard time, to be fully honest. I have a real hard time making sense for what his plan actually is. And that may be just my fault, but I felt like when Theo Epstein was running the team, it felt pretty clear. This is what we're doing from a year-to-year basis. This is when we expect our window to open. And the only thing that we were wrong about really with the Epstein's Cubs was that the window opened a little earlier than we thought it was going to.
Which we're cool with.
Yes, totally fine. That 2015 season was, I still say, the most fun season I've ever had watching a team.
Yep.
It'll never be that fun again. Nope.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But so I think in Hoyer's case, it's just hard to make sense of, because on one hand, you're fielding this team this year that is bad. We'll probably lose 100 games. But then at the same time, you're just off of a winter where you signed Marcus Stroman and you signed Seiya Suzuki. And maybe Stroman, they're eyeing him as a trade candidate next year, or I think they've got I could never remember that third year, if it's an option year or if it's full team control for the third year. But
I think he's got the option, but otherwise.
That's right.
Okay. So, with those kinds of moves where you bring in a Stroman and you bring in, say, a Suzuki, those are the moves that feel like you think you're going to be competitive sooner rather than later.
Suzuki's going to be 30 by the time they're competitive at this rate.
Right. You signed him to a 5-year deal, but you also want to be competitive while he is supposedly in, what you expect to be the peak of his career. Because this year, I think you kind of have to grant him a little bit of growing pains, getting used to the United States, playing here. He's had the injury, all that kind of stuff.
Knock on wood, that's what it is.
Right. You hope that's what it is. And then he turns out to be what they thought they paid for. So that's what confuses me, is because I look at that and I think those are moves like you think you're going to compete in 2023, but then the way he talked earlier this week and just the quality of the team right now, it feels like, man, it's hard to envision them having a roster in 2023 that can not just compete to win the division, but compete for real, because he has to know that no one in Chicago is interested in, hey, we got a division title, but we got knocked out in the division series or a wild card game. We're all over that. That's not the bar anymore. The bar is be like the Dodgers, and for some reason they just can't figure out how to make that happen.
Well, and they had this miraculous emergence the last year and a half with Steele and Thompson, which is great from a starting pitching standpoint. But depending on how many years out we are, those guys are going to be pushing 32 at that rate. Not that that's old, but it feels like their timing is just off.
Right.
And they lost a season of Brendan Davis. I certainly think that they probably had hoped to get more out of Caleb Killian this season at the major league level, right? And so those have been disappointments. But you look at the prospects and you still see the majority of the guys who are going to save you, right, are just getting into AA or are still in A ball. And that's concerning, because as we've seen with so many Cubs prospects in the last 5 years, once they hit AA, it's like the Cinderella turns into the whatever she turns into. I forgot, but you know the point.
Right.
Pumpkin or something. Anyway, these guys as they move up, we just had a bad track record of people reaching their full potential. So you worry about that, and you also look, and I keep reminding myself this. Go back and look at Anthony Rizzo's first 3 major league seasons, or Javi Baez's first 3 major league seasons. These guys struggled. They were up and down, literally, the majors and minors up and down. And it really took 3 years for each of them before they were consistently good, above average star, all-star type players. So if you've got people in low A or high A today who are 19 or 20, or even a Pete Crow Armstrong, right? Just because he's doing well doesn't mean that he's going to actually be like an above average or an all-star caliber player before 2027, right?
Right. He's still in South Bend, so he's got a long way to go. And, I would add to your list of, like, think about even, Kyle Schwarber was the same way. He had to go back to AAA. Ian Happ did the same thing, because really you could make a strong case that just now this year, Ian Happ is fully playing like the guy that you thought you were getting however many years ago. So you're right. Like, just because these guys are doing well in the minors now, that doesn't mean that they're going to help you win games anytime in the near future.
And by all means, it's great to have a bunch of people doing well in the minors. You certainly don't want to have people not doing well in the minors, right? So having a bunch of guys at various levels in the minors succeeding is a great thing, and it's sort of about time, I guess, a little bit, for a farm system that kind of took a nosedive. But you got to ask yourself, in a major market city like this, you don't just wait on A-ball players. That's just not how that works. And I see a lot of people in social media and some fans are like, oh, no, we can't sign free agents because then we might block somebody who might be good in 6 years. And I'm like, look, that's the way it goes. Crazy. I mean, you gotta try to be competitive, and you can't just sit around and say we're going to be middle of the road for the next 4 years, and then these guys in the minors are going to come save us. I mean, first of all, it's good that they have a lot of guys in the minors, a large number of players in the minors who seem to be like they can be major league players. But let's not forget also, when we start comparing this current crop of guys to the 2014 Cubs, I mean, arguably the Cubs had the three top players in the entire minor league system of any team of the league, right? With Bryant and Baez and Russell. Yeah, I mean, they were all ranked at one point or another number 1 or maybe number 2 overall in all of baseball. So those guys were high impact, like guys who come to the majors to be stars, and even they, although Bryant did it, but there were some struggles there for some of the other guys. The guys that are in the system now are not that level, right? They're more like I hate to say it, but the Arizmendi Alcantara level, or the Junior Lake level, and guys who are supposed to be good, but may or may not be.
And maybe this is just a product of, I'm thinking back far enough back in Cubs history, not that it's that long ago, but and maybe enough of the fan base is young enough that they don't remember this kind of thing. But, I remember the days when, Corey Patterson was going to come save the Cubs. And, some of these guys who around 2005, 2006 or so, they were the Felix PA, another great example of, this young guy is going to come up and he's going to save the team, and then he flames out.
And Corey Patterson was a decent major league player. He just wasn't like a game changer all-star,
Right.
And most people aren't, frankly, right?
Yeah, and I feel like maybe I see a little bit of that happening again, where it's like, let's pretend even Pete Crow Armstrong, for instance, just rockets through the minor league system, and he makes his debut next September or something, and even if he does come up and he's phenomenal, you're not winning anything just because this one guy comes up and is great. You need, we should know better by now that you need so much more than that. But it does, I don't know. It feels a little bit like we're getting too hyped up about prospects, especially when you're talking about not signing free agents because you don't want to block somebody. I'm always a proponent for, you take the known quantity. You take the major league guy who's shown you at that level what he can do over the prospect every single time.
Well, thank God they signed Ben Zobrist and didn't wait for
yeah.
Alcantara, right? Because guess what would have
Right.
happened? That would have been bad. I mean, so
Yeah,
Dexter Fowler, same
what you
thing.
have to worry about now is the Carlos Correa effect of I don't want to play there. I'm not interested in playing there. They're too far away, and the tough lure of free agents. It's not you don't have the same lure that you had in prior free agent years. You can't just flip a switch and say, all right, now we're ready to get all the best players that are available. Like,
And it may mean, and
that's
Jeremy,
not it.
that may mean signing, Ian Happ to an extension, right?
And those might be the kinds of moves that you have to do to demonstrate to potential free agents, hey, we're planning to be competitive soon. Because if you're trading an Ian Happ or a Contreras, then whether it's Carlos Correa, any of the other potential free agents, that's a signal to them like, oh no, this team isn't going to win anytime soon. I don't want to be a part of that. Because I think if you go back to where we were around 2014, when they managed to get John Lester to sign with the team, he signed there knowing there was a clarity of what the vision was, a clarity about this is when we expect to be competitive. You're going to be a part of that. And he signed, in faith that was what was going to work out. And I go back to, I wonder if potential free agents feel that same sense of clarity when they talk to the Cubs front office now.
Right.
Well, and the reality is,
I think we're in the situation of, where we were when Masato Tanaka said, no, thanks. I'd rather play for the Yankees. And, the
Joker's
Cubs,
on him, as it turns out.
Yeah, that hindsight. I
see the reasoning.
Exactly, but if the Cubs in 20, when they were signing John Lester, if Theo didn't fly there and give the pitch and was the guy that could really close that deal, if you didn't land John Lester there, who knows what kind of tailspin this Cubs team could have gone into, because they were struggling to get free agents. And I think we're going to be in the same spot where they're struggling to get free agents, especially if they turn around and trade someone like Stroman next year, who they did sign as a free agent.
And you can say, well, don't re-sign Wilson Contreras because he's not worth it. Instead, go out and get somebody worse. Okay. Don't sign Ian Happ, to an extension because, he might not be as good as we hope. Fine. But then what's going to happen is on the free agent market, you're going to look at everybody else and say, well, they're too expensive. And, at some point the market's the market. And I worry, and I don't know what you think, Jared, about this, or Jeremy, but I worry that Jed may play things a little too cute by half, where if he doesn't get like a super good deal, that he just takes a pass. And I think we saw that in free agency last year a little bit. I think we saw it maybe even at the trade deadline. Who knows? But
then you become the White Sox, where like if the White Sox don't feel like they won the deal, then they don't want to do the deal, and that hurts them in free agency every time. You can't be in that position.
Right, and that's I think that's a great example, because you could look at if you want to talk about head scratchers of a trade deadline, what in the world happened with the White Sox? We could probably talk about that separately for a while.
acting like the window's already closed.
I hate to. Yeah, I really think so, because there's probably a few different reasons why, but I think there's one major one. And I think that's the risk that the Cubs run, is if you're trying to get too cute, or if you're too focused on winning a deal versus, I think too, there's a lot that goes into some of these contract extensions that I think we get too mired in, and I say we, meaning a lot of times front offices, I think, is they don't factor in what does it mean for us on a more like a human level if we give Wilson Contreras a contract extension. We can boil it all down to our spreadsheets and figure out exactly how much we think he's going to help us. But when it comes to a potential free agent who says, who looks at that and says, man, they made Wilson Contreras a deal so that he can be a Cub for life, or Ian Happ, they signed him to an extension, and they showed some faith in him to continue in, the development that he's shown over the last year. Stuff like that I think matters too. And I wonder sometimes if there's too much of, we're so focused on like the numbers and the cold, hard, black and white stuff, and we forget those other things.
And when you watch a Dodgers game and you look at the players in that lineup, do you find yourself going online saying, I wonder if that guy was living up to his contract or not? No, you're like, that team's really good, and that's what you want your team to be. And if only the Cubs had their own television network, highest price tickets in the league, and high attendance, maybe they could compete. But
they could have managed to afford it somehow. Yeah. And the Dodgers too do things like, did they need to go get Freddie Freeman? Probably not, but they went and did it anyway. That's the kind of stuff you need.
So the Braves can't beat them anymore.
Right. Yeah. Like we'll take your first baseman. Thank you very much. Yeah. That's the kind of stuff the Cubs should be doing. Like, going back to.
I think we did mention getting Freddie Freeman at one point.
Yes, he was on our short list
several times. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, he should have been on everybody's list. Yeah, but that's the kind of aggressiveness that you need to have, because that goes back to what I said earlier about can they field a team that's capable of winning the National League Central? Yeah, probably, but can they field a team that's going to like dominate the National League? I don't know, because that's where your bar should be.
And the trick is, yes, you've got people in the minors who hopefully will help, but in the meantime, how long can you wait with the current crop of guys? With the right now we're in the Steele, Thompson, Warner, Happ, Contreras world, right? Like these are the players. These are the quote veterans, or the guys who you're counting on. And do you either strip that down like you did the last time with the other core, or do you augment that with new players? And then they've got Suzuki now too, so you can throw him in the mix. But it seems to me that this is a core that you need to augment. I mean, is it crazy for me to say the Cubs need to go get a first baseman, for God's sake? I mean, this is embarrassing.
They literally don't have a first baseman right now. So yeah, I mean, talk about
and look, the Cubs have been bad for a long time, but I'll tell you one thing they always had. That was a first baseman, whether it was Ernie Banks or Bill Buckner or Leon Durham or Mark Grace or Derek Lee or even Carlos Pena. And you keep going. Like, not having a first baseman on the Cubs is an oddity, not a norm. But this team, and then Rizzo, of course, more recently. But looking back on things, maybe the Cubs should have signed Rizzo to a 2-year deal or 3-year deal and just overpaid him. Who cares? It's not like they're touching the salary cap by any stretch. Sometimes you just do stuff like that because it A, makes people happy, but B, it's better than where you're at now. I mean, that's the difference. And so hopefully this offseason when they go out there, looking at the free agents that are available, of which there are fewer and fewer, but hopefully there'll be some there. And sometimes you just gotta take a lunge and get past, as I referenced on Twitter today, the Jason Hayward PTSD of possibly offering someone a lot of money.
And that's I think I wonder a little bit about is, are they gun shy because of, not him by himself, but he's I think the biggest example of that, and I think also about, guys like Tyler Chatwood, some of these contracts that they were doling out a few years ago that really just did not work out. And you do wonder if there's a little bit of a feeling of, they're kind of gun shy. These guys will all tell you that they don't pay any attention to social media. They're not looking at Twitter. They don't care what anybody says, and yet they seem to be oddly in tune to and aware.
Yeah.
Right. Like it kills me when they talk, I don't know anything about that. And yet they seem very, so they all have burner accounts, whatever.
Yeah. We listen to this show too. Yeah,
So yeah, I think there is probably you need to get past it and be willing to risk that you might do a contract like that again, a Hayward type deal where you make that lunge, you're really pushing it a little bit, and obviously you hope it works out, but you're taking because for every Jason Hayward type contract that you have, there's also, like, we never talk about how amazing of a deal John Lester turned out to be.
Yeah. Look, if you're a big market team and you have no bad contracts on your ledger, you probably aren't trying very hard. I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean,
Right.
That's the benefit of being a large market team is you can make a couple of mistakes and it's okay. It really doesn't set you back. It's only money. Whereas it's not a hard salary cap, so it really only sets you back money. If you're like the Tampa Bay Rays, you're like a real small market team where you are right on the margins and you make a mistake, it can set you back years. And so you have that flexibility. You need to that's a competitive advantage to be able to take that kind of risk.
Because it starts to feel like you're playing the market not to lose.
Yep.
Which is, is not at all how you want to do it.
And Jared, by the way, speaking of money and markets, why do you think the Cubs don't, like a lot of people have suggested, take on some bad contracts when they're in this period where they're not trying to win and they've got tons of money, tons of availability, in their salary right now?
And they're stockpiling prospects.
Yeah, why not? Why not get some more prospects for somebody like we talk about Hosmer, but anybody, even Will Myers. Why not?
Yeah, this is the time to do it. There's really not, you're not losing anything because they're so far beneath the first threshold of the luxury tax that you could afford to take on a lot of those, and it's not really going to hurt you. And I think there's the potential for these are those like potentially low risk, high reward types of moves where, hey, if he continues to be terrible, then whatever, it's cost us some money. No big deal though in the big picture. But if he, I don't know, it has a good first half of a season or something, then you can flip him and you benefit. So it does surprise me.
The old Carlos Silva deal, right?
Yes,
wasn't he the guy they got for? Was it for when they dumped Bradley or somebody? They got Carlos Silva. I forget who they dumped, but he ended up playing pretty well. And they were able to flip him, I think. So that's what you want.
Right. They're overly conservative with this kind of thing. And it
just
to doesn't.
Get prospects out of it, too, would be the nice part. On
right.
top of everything else. Give us some good prospects.
And it's, and it's just hard to it puzzles me given the size of the market. You're Chicago, you're the Cubs, you play in a stadium that is pretty much full 81 times a year. You have your own network. You have all this, what is it? I'm left kind of baffled with why they insist on continuing to act like you are the Cincinnati Reds. And that's the budget that you have. It just doesn't make sense.
No, and when we look at when we look at the upcoming schedule, it's really telling about where the Cubs are in this process because you are going to watch the Chicago Cubs play the Cincinnati Reds, the Washington Nationals, one game against Baltimore, all here in the next week. Those teams, Cincinnati and Washington, are significantly they are worse than you. They are trying to be and succeeding at being just as bad. They're in the race to the bottom as the teams are doing it right now. Now Cincinnati has also they're one game better than the Cubs currently, but nothing like playing each other. The Cubs, as we saw this weekend against Miami, can beat bad teams, and so they could go ahead and win themselves right out of the lottery playing teams like Washington and Cincinnati.
My worst nightmare is to go through this entire season and not end up with a good draft pick. Come on.
Well, and if you want to spin it a little forward, if you look at what their September schedule is like, and even the last couple of weeks of the season, they've got kind of a soft landing there because there's a lot of games
Reds, right?
Yeah, a lot of games against the Reds, but in late September, you're Miami for 3, Pittsburgh for 4, and then you have those last 6 games of the season where it's 3 at home against Cincinnati, and then you go to Cincinnati for 3 to finish the year. So yeah, it's their schedule's actually pretty soft, once they get through like that Labor Day weekend series where you've got Milwaukee for 3, and then you do Toronto for 3, and then you go St. Louis, that's going to be a rough stretch. But yeah, and so you're right. Like they could play themselves right out of that lottery spot.
When you don't, yeah, that's how it's crazy how terrible some of these teams are. And so when your strategy is to tank, you got to really think like, can we get that bad? If not, then why are we even bothering with the tank?
There was a time when the Cubs were the team tanking, right? And when you're the only one doing it, you can kind of manipulate things and work it to your advantage. And the Astros did it. And, that was a rough couple of years for them. But back then, it worked. Tanking now seems to be sort of the
majority of the league.
Yeah,
well, yeah.
I mean,
it no longer works when everybody's doing it. Yeah,
right. It's a lot harder when everybody's doing it, and I think some teams now do it more disingenuously than the Cubs or the Astros ever did, because now it's easy to say, well, we're doing this intentionally. It's part of our long-term strategy. I'm like, yeah, you tell that to the Reds who tanked for like 5 years so they could finish 500 for 2 years and start tank again. I mean,
or the Detroit Tigers, yeah,
or the Pirates, right? Like we're going to tank until we get some good players, and then we're going to trade them and tank again. But yeah, it is more difficult for a big market team like the Cubs, I think, to tank a couple seasons because they've got so much competition in the tanking world, which is why it's so absolutely imperative that if you do have players on expiring contracts like Contreras and others, that you actually trade them and get something for them, and that if you do have the opportunity to take on money from some other team for a player's contract in exchange for getting prospects from that team, that you do that too, because those are the things that the small market tanking teams don't do, because they don't have the money to do that. And that's what's frustrating, is the Cubs don't seem to be fully embracing the sort of the possible tanking opportunities. They're playing a straight tank as opposed to a more multi-dimensional tank, and they don't need to do that because they're not the Pirates or the Reds or the Tigers.
Oh, sorry, Jared.
And it feels like you're using a strategy that worked a decade ago, and while not recognizing that the rest of the league has caught on to what you're doing, and you can't pull it off the same way anymore.
Exactly. There's the rest in the National League alone. There are 7 teams with a negative run differential. The American League also has 7 teams with a negative run differential, and of those 14 teams, you have 6 of them that all have negative run differentials over 100.
Yeah,
so
right.
they're real bad teams out there. 6 teams that have negative 100 run differential or more.
Gosh, but it's all just wonderful for the popularity of the sport, right? Like,
oh God,
that's what all the kids love. The kids are always talking about it.
Remember the Players Association was, and I think rightly so, in negotiations with the owners. It was, hard to believe it was only about 6 months ago, right? 5 months ago. We're saying, look, this is bad for the integrity of the game. This tanking thing is not good for baseball. It's not good for fans. It's not good for cities. And, there was some back and forth, and ultimately they agreed to compromise on some other issues and kind of move forward. Like, this was never truly resolved, it seems like. And it's a problem.
And I would say this right now, this year might be, is this the worst we've ever seen it? I mean, the gulf between, when you talk about like the Yankees and the Astros and the Dodgers, the gulf between them and teams like the Pirates and the Reds, it's getting to it's almost farcical. Like, how are these franchises even in the same league anymore?
Did you think the Padres are better than Washington a week ago? I did. But guess what? Then they got Washington's one truly phenomenal generational player. So now they're definitely way better. Right? I mean, it's kind of like
right. And you're in an era where, as a fan base, depending on what team you root for, you have to prepare yourself for, holy cow, we got a Juan Soto who is like a generational type talent, and by the time he's 23, we've already have to say goodbye and he gets traded somewhere else.
It'd be like the 1989 Bulls trading Michael Jordan for like
Right.
3 number ones and 2 like, middle of the road possible.
Yes. It's like, and it's absurd that even happens. And now I know the articles have come out that Shohei Ohtani, they were never actually really close to trading him. But the fact that was even being discussed, because he is like a once in a lifetime type talent. And you, as a franchise, your answer is, well, we need to trade him rather than we need to figure out whatever it takes to win while we have this guy in our team. Bad enough that you've had Mike Trout for all this time and you've never been able to figure it out. Now you have Trout and Ohtani and you still can't figure it out. I know Trout's dealing with back issues, but there's, and I know I'm speaking to like a larger baseball problem now, but I think we see some, the Cubs are not immune to this at all, where it's like, what's our end goal here? What are we really trying to accomplish? Is our goal to be a winning baseball team and be a winning team year after year? Or is our goal to be, as financially flexible as possible and have the, all that kind of stuff? Like, what is it we're really here to do? Because it feels like with a lot of franchises, like they've lost the plot.
Well, I call this the championship fallacy, which is that unless we have overwhelming force and we are by far the best team in all of baseball, we should be the worst team in baseball because, what's the point? If we're not going to win at all, what's the point? But the fallacy is that you have to be that much better than everyone else in order to win it all. And year after year, we see teams like the Braves last year. The Braves were 3 games over 500 at the All-Star break?
They had the same record as the Cubs in June.
Yeah. So they were not a fait accompli. It was just a couple of years ago, the Royals were in that same, but we were the Royals.
Or the Nationals.
The Nationals when they were under 500 in August or whatever crazy year that was. So, half the time, a team that you never really thought was that good, they're okay, wins the World Series.
They get hot at the right time.
Well, half the time, the good teams win the World Series. That's the way it goes. That's what we were always worried about in 2016. We were petrified that we're going to lose to like the now Guardians or or somebody,
and it wouldn't,
or the Giants or something.
The Giants,
right?
Yeah. You go back to that division series. It wouldn't have taken much for the Cubs to have lost in the first round, despite how good they were in the regular season.
So we forget sometimes that you don't have to have this like overwhelming juggernaut in order to compete for a World Series. In fact, it's counter to what Theo Epstein initially said his strategy was, which is the goal is to get into the playoffs every single year. Yes. And then kind of take it from there. And some years you'll be stronger than others. Some years you might get hotter or maybe colder than others. But if you're at the dance, you might get a chance to dance with somebody at the dance. But if you're at home, you certainly can't. And we've seen with the team like the Cardinals over the course of 30 years now, at least longer, I know, but that I can think of, the Cardinals just kind of meander into the playoffs pretty much most years, and some years they actually win the World Series. One year they won the World Series with like 83 wins in the regular season. So you got to get there to play.
Yeah, and on that note, I mean, just recently I was covering a White Sox game, and I asked Tony La Russa about this year's team, and I just said, when you look at the White Sox, your win-loss record versus where you are in the standings, how what's your gauge for? Do I base the success of my team on the fact that we're only 1 game above 500, or do I base it on the fact that we're only 2 games back in the division? And his immediate response was, "You're talking to the guy who managed a team that won 83 games and won the World Series."
Yeah,
and the 2006 Cardinals are probably a little, they're a bit of an outlier, but at the same time, I think it does illustrate the point that you're making, that if the goal, just get in as many times as you can, and then stuff happens and you increase the likelihood that you're going to have a chance, because why take yourself out of the fight even before you get there?
The 2018 Cubs were a fantastic team that won 95 games, probably would have won 100 games, but for the fact that they ran out of gas. And they had a lot of injuries, and their entire bullpen was destroyed, and they had to play 40 games in a row and fly back and forth from Washington and on their off day, et cetera. That's a team that easily could have won 100 games. And they did it, and they got to the playoffs, and they were just really cold. But I tell you, most years, if you said, hey, Cubs could win 95 games this year. You in? Is this a year you're looking forward to? It'd be like, yep, count me in. Let's go to some games, right? I mean, it just fate is what it is, but being healthy at the right time, being hot at the right time.
Yeah, because you change a couple of variables for that 2018 Cubs team, and they probably don't lose. They're probably not even in the wild card game.
Right.
Let alone losing it. They're probably not even in it.
Right. If Carlos Marble doesn't cough up that Labor Day game when Rizzo hit the homer off Hader, the Cubs win that game and win the series and probably never look back. Not to point to one moment, but that's the one I can think of. The other thing is it works the other way. In 2015, didn't Jorge Soler breach base 8 straight times against the Cardinals or something? I mean, everything was going right. He had 6 home runs in one game. Jeremy, we were there. Remember?
Talk about fun moments. Absolutely.
So I'm sure the Cardinals were sitting there thinking, well, son of a bitch, we won 101 games and we just got trounced by a team which admittedly won 98 games or something. So it's not like the Cubs were bad that year, but yeah, they probably just were just shaking their heads because that's what happens. It's that's why the Cubs were a wild card team that year and they almost went to the World Series. So point is, I think sometimes we can get a little too over obsessed with the idea of having to have a perfect team or let's just have the worst team possible. And there is a little bit of a middle ground. That's not to say you want to win 80 games and be in 500 purgatory forever. But,
no, we'll leave that to the Bears.
Oh God! If only they could be 500. But sometimes there are seasons where you might win 87, 88 games. The 2003 season we were talking about Bartman, right? The Cubs, did they win that year? 86 games. They won more games in 04 and didn't make the playoffs. So, point being, you got to try to field a team that's competitive. And they've punted last year and this year. That's 2 years. That's enough for a major market team, right? At some point, you just got to start pushing forward and say, guess what? We're going to try to win, finally, and see what happens. I'm sorry. It's just to do it otherwise is very defeatist.
Jared, last question from me here as we're going to wrap it up. Being at the ballpark, talking to players and coaches this weekend, what was the vibe now that we're over the weirdness of having both Wilson and Ian Happ still there? Is the vibe just we're running out this season? Is it is it just kind of is it down? Is it up? What was kind of the vibe in talking to people this weekend?
Yeah, it was, and I actually wrote about it on Friday. So shameless plug here, but
I'm teeing it up for you, Jared.
Because it is, David Ross, he's always very mindful of saying, I managed to try to win every game. But at the same time, he talked more on Friday than I think I've ever heard him talk about player development and things like giving some of his younger relief pitchers, opportunities to work themselves out of jams, or some of his younger starters like Keegan Thompson and Justin Steele.
The Cubs have something other than a younger relief pitcher.
Sorry, at this point, that's all they have left. Yeah. But he talks a lot more about giving opportunities so that these guys can learn. And the same with some of the younger players that are, in the lineup, where earlier in the season, I didn't really hear him talking that much about that sort of thing. So I think mentally he has shifted a little bit to he's embracing some of the just outright player development type stuff that needs to happen given the roster that he has. And, whereas and he said in the past where I might have pinch hit for somebody in a certain situation or pulled a pitcher in a certain situation, I may give them a little more opportunity and I'm going to leave you in and let you work through this so that you get that experience. Because one of the things he said over the weekend was you need that experience now, because when you hopefully are a championship caliber team, or at least a playoff caliber team, you're going to be in a lot of really difficult spots and playing matchups and needing to be prepared for all kinds of different things. And if you've never had the experience of doing any of that, how could we possibly expect that you can handle it in that moment? So
yeah, Phil Jackson used to do that with the Bulls all the time in the regular season. Give a guy a chance.
Right, and it's the smart thing to do. And so when you have like a Christopher Morel, for instance, where you might sit him against a pitcher that you think he might struggle against, maybe now over the next 8 weeks or so, you give him a couple of those starts and let him face a tough matchup just to give him that experience and let him handle it. And the same with some of these relief pitchers that they have, where it's like, all right, well, let's, we're gonna let you, stay in against some of these tough spots, or you're in a jam, but I'm gonna let you face one more batter than I would have in the past, just to get you that experience. And so that was kind of like my big takeaway from the weekend, was he seems to have shifted. He's obviously a very competitive guy, because talking to him in the interview room after a loss is he takes the losses hard, even now. He does, but he's I think there's been a little bit of a shift.
And just do it 30 more times and we're good.
Right.
This season.
All right, and with that, we're going to wrap it up. We're calling it a podcast. Jared, please remind our listeners where they can follow you on Twitter and where they can find all your work on the internet.
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm at Wyllys, JWYLOYS. And then you can read my work at CHGO. It's allchgo.com. And then also, I would love it if you'd subscribe to my newsletter. I write a newsletter called The Dugout that comes out once every other week. And that's where I get to, reflect a little bit on baseball, but also just stuff that's going on in the world and life and some of those kinds of things. I really enjoy writing those, and you can find the link to that in my Twitter bio.
I am a subscriber, and it's quite good.
Yeah, we're both subscribers. We both enjoy it highly, but how much does it cost somebody to subscribe to something like that?
It turns out it is totally free.
Unbelievable, folks.
Wow.
This is totally free. You should be signing up right now. Don't miss this.
I feel like I actually make money when I read it, because I learn something that I can then share with others.
That is high praise. I thank you.
Absolutely, because it costs no dollars. It just costs time, and this is a great way to invest that time in reading Jared's newsletter. Highly recommend it. And as always, Jared, thank you for coming on and talking Cubs with us. We always have a great time catching up with you. You can follow us on Twitter as well, at Wrigleyville Nat. The same for Instagram, Facebook.com/Wrigleyville Nation as well. We have merch. We've got a TeePublic shop. The link is in our Twitter or Instagram pages. Go there, or you go to the website that brings you this podcast every single week, WrigleyvilleNation.com. There's a link to the store there. Takes you to our TeePublic shop. There's a sale going on at all times, so go get items that are on sale right now before the summer's over. Go and get yourself something to support the show. If you also want to support the show, the reason we can do this ad-free every single week is because we have a Patreon, patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation as well. All the fine folks that are supporting us via Patreon, they're the reasons that you guys can be freeloaders and have no ads throughout the show. So if you want to support the show financially, you can do that there. Patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. We've got exclusive merchandise over there, exclusive shirts available there. And you can, if you can't support the show financially in these times, we understand as well. We rely on your word of mouth. So Cubs fans know other Cubs fans. So make sure you tell them about the show. Tell them how to subscribe to a podcast. Go ahead and continue to spread the word about this show. We couldn't do it without you. And we appreciate all the support we get through a lot of these tough seasons. Our listener base continues to remain strong, and that's something that we are very appreciative of. So thank you to all the listeners who continue to support this show. And with that, we're wrapping it up. We're calling it a podcast. Pat, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.